Okay, so welcome. And Kate Stewart, it's your evening. And
Okay, thanks. I thought we could start by briefly introducing ourselves. If
okay.
if that's okay. There's not a ton of us, so I thought we could do that quickly. So I'm Kate Stewart. I'm a member of the league and I'm membership chair. I know some of you are newer, you're from other leagues, so I just wanted to do that quickly. And I'll call people out. So let's go with Nancy and Neil.
Okay, I'm Nancy.
Okay. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm Nancy. I'm with DEI Outreach, and
I'm Neil, and I'm part of the 10% of the League of Women Voters.
Okay. I realize we have 3 Nancys here. So I did. Okay.
Always.
Yeah, let's go with the next Nancy, I guess.
Is that me?
Sure.
Okay, I'm just a visitor right now. I want to join the league, and a friend of mine invited me today.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay. And there was, is it Lindemann? Is that your last name? The other Nancy on the phone?
Yeah, I'm on the phone, Nancy Lindemann, and I'm a member of the Tucson League. So that's
Yeah,
what I'm doing
thanks
here.
for coming.
Yeah.
Okay. How about Pat Tapke?
I'm Pat Tapke. I'm a member of the league and I'm the treasurer.
Okay. And Evangeline?
I'm Evangeline Song. I'm a member of Metropolitan Phoenix, and I'm here because of Deb Wallace.
Great. Okay. Let's see, Shelley.
Hi everyone, Shelley Erickson. I'm on the DEI committee, the outreach committee, also the Observer Corps, and I edit the Voter. And really excited about our program tonight. Thanks.
Okay. Sharon.
Sharon Bagot, and I'm happen to be across the table from Stacy. So good to see you again, Stacy. I'm glad to hear. I couldn't hear you that night, so looking forward to hearing you today.
Okay. Kathy.
I'm Kathy Aros, and I was also at the table, not across, but kind of sideways from you. And anyway, so glad that you could make it to speak with us tonight. And I'm a member of the DEI Book Club and also the LWV Book Club.
Okay. Pam.
Pam Burris. I'm a member of this chapter on the DEI committee.
And Bob.
Hi, I'm Bob Delaney. I'm a member of the Tucson League of Women Voters, member of the DEI committee, and a new board member.
Great. Sandy.
I'm Sandy Davenport, a member of the Tucson League and active with the DEI committee. Thanks.
Debbie, all the way from Oregon.
I'm Debbie Wallace. I'm a member of the Tucson League, long distance from Portland, and a member of the DEI committee.
Okay. And Mary.
I'm Mary Gresham. I'm a member of the DEI committee and do a number of other things, but I'm glad to be on this. And it's nice to see you again, Stacy, and all of you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And just want to ask everybody to mute if you can, while we're, for now, unless you're speaking. And I thought, so if you have the book, and I think all of you do, you've read Stacy's bio and know that, you know, she's from Arizona, from Kayenta, and she has an MFA from, it's the Institute of, it's American Indian Arts from Santa Fe. And she lives in Utah. This is her first book of short stories. And Stacy was invited to the Tucson Festival of Books a few months ago, where some of us met her there. And then, so we wanted to ask her to come and speak. I also wanted to mention that her book is one of the Southwest Books of the Year, which is really terrific. I love reading that list of books every year, and seeing what's on it. And her book has been nominated for, I think, a few other awards. But before I start asking her some questions, I just wanted to ask if if Stacy wanted to introduce herself any further or tell us anything more about herself before we get going.
Thank you. I'd like to introduce myself with my language. So this is just how my people introduce ourselves to find relatives. So jag är Stacy Denetsosi Yanishia Todichinle Nakaibashichin is a Fanadashache, Balaganadashnala. Those are my 4 clans. I'm the Bitterwater clan. I'm born for the Mexican people. My maternal grandparents are the Many Goats clan, and my paternal grandparents are European American. And that's how I identify myself. So if anybody identifies as European American, then you are my grandparent, my paternal grandparent. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, just excited to be here. I had so much fun in Tucson at the Festival of Books. It was so cool. I kept telling everybody about it, and I was bragging to another Navajo author about how cool my table was. And I was like, I bet your table didn't invite you to do other things. Mine did. So yeah, happy to be here with your group.
Thank you. Oh, I wanted to start out by asking, when did you start writing stories, and how that process evolved, I guess, and when did you start thinking of writing as something you could do professionally?
Good question. I started writing stories when I was in middle school. I came to writing in a really different way. So a lot of my life has been spent trying to figure out how to tell stories. Before that, I did a lot of comic book art. I thought I wanted to be an animator and tell stories that way. But then I realized that I could let go of like the picture frames, and I'm like, oh, I could just write this story. It sped up a lot faster. My mom was not allowed to go to school when she was younger because my grandmother heard from my grandfather just about boarding schools, and it really traumatized her. And so my mom never learned how to formally read or write. So a lot of my skills were employed just from, necessity, like learning to read bills and do paperwork and all of that stuff. And thankfully I found a passion in it, and I was able to continue doing that. Today I write these stories to share my story about that I feel like is non-traditional. I like to think of myself as a generation removed because my mom didn't have the opportunity to get an education. So a lot of my stories have parents who have little to no education, and the characters are just learning how to live in kind of these gritty environments and figuring out what survival and ceremony and other aspects like that mean to them.
Wow, okay. That's really cool about the art thing. Oh, I also want to
you
say,
can see my M&Ms over
Yeah.
here. I drew those.
You did those, yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to mention, if anybody has other questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or we could get to them hopefully. And I guess as you're growing up, or when you're starting to write these stories, what other writers have you been influenced by, or did you really love when you were growing up?
Yeah, growing up, I really loved writers like, I think one of the first books that I was gifted by my aunt was from Sherman Alexie, and it was the True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. And it was one of the most just striking texts that I'd ever read before, because I had never seen myself represented in a book like that. And that was just my first exposure. But growing up and getting older, I really enjoyed Louise Erdrich's The Roundhouse. That deals a lot with like Indian tribal law, as well as like missing and murdered Indigenous women. I really like this collection by, what is her name? Kelly Jo Ford, and she wrote Crooked Hallelujah. It's a Cherokee short story collection, really gorgeous. And I got a chance to meet her at IAIA, and she was a wonderful mentor. And Tommy Orange, his There was it just blew up. Like when it was released, and I remembered where I was when it was like published, or I don't know, when it was announced, because it was such a big deal in the community. And yeah, there's a lot of other people. Brendan Basham, he wrote Swim Home to the Vanished. He's another Navajo author. But yeah, just reading the works have been really important to me, because part of going to IAIA, they mentioned that we were rewriting the literary landscape. And I didn't really understand what that meant until we graduated. And what I mean by that is that a lot of people come to the page with a preconceived notion of what they think Native American literature is, and who Native American people are. And maybe that doesn't happen as much with other genres. Or maybe it does. I'm not sure. I can only speak from my experience. And so it really is like, you are, as a writer, trying to balance storytelling along with teaching, and also being respectful of your people. And I think that in that way, we are rewriting the literary landscape, and I think it's really cool. I'm excited to have written a book and put it out in the community, and be able to be in spaces with other Native writers. It's been really cool.
Yeah. I guess, and along those lines, when you went to IAI, I wondered if you could talk a bit more about how that influenced you as a writer, and how you saw yourself kind of like fitting into, all these other authors that have influenced you, and now you're putting your voice out there, and how do you think it has kind of fit in with other voices?
Yeah. IAIA was a really cool experience. I did a lot of my education here in northern Utah. And I've never had any Native American professors or instructors. I had Native American mentors, like in my college, like advisors and stuff, but not anybody. Hold on a second. Not anybody formally like teaching me. And IAIA was a different experience, because all of the mentors were Native American, and a lot of my workshops were with other Native American people. So it's really cool to be in a collaborative environment where you don't really have to explain as much, because you come to an understanding with readers already having a certain knowledge when they come to the page. And I think it helped me shed some of that over explaining. When I came, my mentor was like, "Whoa, you're over explaining. Like, if you were a person, if you were a videographer, like, you are holding the camera too tight, and you are showing everybody exactly what you want them to see and nothing else." And she's like, "You need to release some of that authorial custody, because your readers can handle it." And so I think that was probably the most important thing, was feeling empowered by my mentors and feeling empowered by my peers.
Right. So I want to kind of dig into like your creative process, I guess, and like how you you've said that you've drawn inspiration from your own life for a lot of these stories, but I wondered, how do you just grab an idea and kind of run with it, or how do you develop your stories? Do you have any kind of process or methods that you rely on to do that, or is it different every time?
Yeah, I think it's different every time, but most of the time the stories come to me with one key image, or one key idea. For example, one of my stories, The Casket in the Back Seat, that was inspired by my grandfather passing, and he passed in a very similar way. He was at a dialysis appointment, and there was a blood clot, and it was very sudden and unexpected. But I remember when we were at the cemetery, this like white Suburban pulled in, and they opened it up, and his casket was just back there. And the driver was this Navajo woman, and I remember being like, whoa, like how could she do this? Like, this is so strange, because it's very taboo for Navajo people to be around the dead. Like, it's not really a thing that we're advised to do. Like, we're told if we go into like health professions, we should get like ceremonies done each year. Or a lot of my friends who became like anthropologists, they also have to get ceremonies done each year. So doing a job like that was really hard. Like, I don't know, I just never seen it before. And so from that, I was just really intrigued by the idea of a grandfather communicating with his grandson, and like what they would talk about, or why is this happening. So sometimes it's a story leading up to the key image that I found interesting, or other times it's a topic that I want to cover, like in the Missing Morning Star. I knew I wanted to cover the topics of two-spirit individuals as well as missing and murdered Indigenous women, and kind of how those two communities fit. Oftentimes, two-spirit people or LGBT people are most at risk to be missing and murdered Indigenous people, MMIWP. And so that's something that I wanted to tackle in that. And that story just came out of a lot of exploration of what this topic means to me, and how I felt these sort of incidences wounded our community, but also in a way helped us better figure out a process to better protect like our people and whatnot. So yeah, I approach it a lot of different ways.
Okay. Shelley has a question. I wanted to ask this too about I'm assuming you wrote more stories than what you have in here, and like how do you choose what goes into a book, and were you shooting for a certain theme, or I don't know, it's supposed to be a really hard choice.
Yeah, so a majority of these stories I wrote during my MFA program at the Institute of American Indian Arts. And then another, I think 3 of these stories were written during my time at school here in Utah. And one of the stories came from my undergraduate program from Utah. So really, it was subtracting like maybe 5 stories. It is a compilation of like all of the work that I've ever done. So that was a little bit intimidating, and kind of pruning it down to what I wanted it to be. Like, I had a story about COVID-19, but it didn't fit, and the story never came together. I had another story that was kind of a creepier story, but I decided to save that one for like a novel. So really, I tried to think of the pieces that I had that I felt were the most polished, and those are the ones that went into the book. But I wish I could say like, yeah, I cut like 20 other stories. No, those are pretty much all the stories I had. And I feel brave saying that, because I met another Navajo author, and his name is Bojan Lewis, and he was like, oh, these are all the stories I've ever written ever. And I was like, wow, he just said that so plainly. And people respect him because he's a dude.
Okay. We had another question from Janice about your use of similes, and I really loved a lot of the language that you used, and slang, and I guess like Navajo terms. And wanted to ask, I guess, about your choice of language, and how you know, is it very deliberate, or is this just something you don't really think about when writing?
Yeah, I would say that it is deliberate. Oftentimes I think about the Navajo language. Navajo language was my first language, and unfortunately, I don't speak it fluently anymore. But I try, and that's important. Um, but the language itself is very poetic. There's certain ways that you talk about things, and they describe like maybe the texture of a plant and how that separates it from another plant, or just like different types of wool. Um, it it's all very specific. Um, and then translating that to English can sometimes be difficult. So I do find myself using a lot of similes because I think that that's an approximation of how I feel like it would sound like in Navajo. And then other things that I do is I talk to my mom a lot, and my mom, she's still a fluent speaker of our language, and as a ESL person, she uses so many similes to try to describe just everyday experiences. In one of my stories called "The Sheep is a Body of Knowledge," one of the most poetic things that she said is, I was asking her, like, Mom, how do you butcher? And she was explaining, like, this sounds weird, but when you look down into the chest cavity of a sheep, you're gonna see it's like hip bones. And the way that she described it is, she's like, it appears in front of you like a butterfly. And like, I was just like, whoa, I would never think to describe a pelvis in that way. But because sometimes when you don't have complete command of the English language, you have to be more creative. So sometimes I write based on what I think it would sound like. Sometimes I just ask my mom, how would you say this? And it ends up in the book.
I guess it makes me wonder too, you have so many stories about mothers and daughters. And I wondered what your mother thinks. I don't know if does she know exactly what's in all of your stories, and
Yeah.
what does she think of that?
Yeah. I think that she is really proud and also very understanding. I've been to other readings, and one of the questions that was asked was like, a lot of the mothers in your book are bad, or something like that. They're like, you have a lot of bad mothers in your book. Like, why do you have it like that? And when I was really thinking about it, I was like, I don't think that those moms are necessarily bad. I think that they've been put in situations where life is extremely challenging. Um, and in certain ways, people who live in challenging situations show love differently. And that might be an aspect of teaching your child an element of survival, or how to be more self sufficient. And I think that in that way, my mom gets it. She also understands that I have like really deep, immense respect for her. And also, I think I've put a pretty good balance of really like strong um strong stories about mother-daughter relationships. Like, one of the ones that I was particularly focusing on mother-daughter relationships was Wool Dolls. And I have a scene in there where after the main character is broken up with by her boyfriend, she's crying to her mom, and her mom soothes her. And it sounds really lame when you just explain it, but writing it I think that I was able to go in with a little bit more poetic license and just show how sometimes particularly Navajo mothers show with love with actions, um, rather than specifically saying it outright, like, I love you. And I think a lot of cultures are like that.
Sure. Okay, I guess so. One question I had in a big sense is, sorry, what were you trying to accomplish with this book? Like, did you have like a goal in mind of when you set out to try to get it published?
Yeah, I I had the goal of telling stories about young Navajo women on and off the reservation. Hopefully stories that LGBT individuals could identify with, that showed our lives and the complicated nature of what it means to be Indigenous in today's world. And a large focus of that book is kind of what it means to survive post colonization, and what kind of long-term effects are impacting these characters long after these things have happened. I think that a lot of individuals, or I've heard from people say like, oh, that happened a long time ago, like why aren't you over it? Where I think for Indigenous people that type of memory isn't like that. It's often a lot closer, and there's still issues that I face today that are an issue because of colonialism. Like my grandfather, he passed because of the blood clot, but he also had cancer from uranium mining, and that's just really sad. And then also with my mother, like my grandmother's distrust of schools. And so I think that when you compound these issues, you can kind of see why people need to make the decisions that they're making to survive. And I think that was my main goal, was to show like circumstances can be difficult. We live in harsh and hard environments, but still we thrive. It's still we connect, and we'll be here forever. Like that's kind of our plan. And so yeah, I think it was a message of resistance. And with getting it published, it was the Torrey House Press is a nonprofit publisher who publish eco literature. And I guess I write a lot about land, so they liked that, and I presented it to them, and they picked it up, and they've been really encouraging. And from publishing it to now, I didn't really have a lot of expectations of what I wanted the book to do. I think I just wanted people to read it, but it's been really exciting to see it become like the 2024 Southwest Book of the Year. That was really cool. I was on the short list for the Penn Awards, and that's like a really prestigious like writing award. I think it's been cool to see my book do things that I never believed that I could do, just based on people telling me like I was told in college, like, you should drop out, like you're not that smart. So to have a book and have it achieve so much, it's been pretty cool. Like I want to put it in all the mailboxes of my professors who are like, you shouldn't major in English.
Wow. Okay. I guess, and thinking about this, like this audience that you have now, like, did you have kind of an ideal reader in mind when you're writing it, and do you think this has gone beyond that? And I'm just kind of curious, like, if there are people reading this now that you would have never expected to read it, that is it grown to get there now?
Yeah. My main reader was like the style in which I wrote this, it technically it's called literary fiction, and my publisher told me they're like, people who read literary fiction, they're not buying it on their Kindle, they're buying it paperback book, and there's not a lot of those readers left. People aren't reading like that anymore, and I was like, oh great, thanks for telling me that. And so my ideal reader was like maybe college aged students, probably like women, and then also just like maybe women in their 30s to 40s, Navajo, or just Indigenous in some type of way. I think that the audience that has surprised me is probably this demographic. I've had a lot of readings where I have a lot of awesome women in the community who are trailblazers. Like I did a reading in Cortez, and it was a librarian um who gathered all these people together, and she was like, yeah, we all read your book, and I don't think anybody was like under like 60. So it was really cool. And I think that's been the most unexpected demographic, because I think that in the literary world, or specifically like native lit world, they're like, these are the people that are most difficult to like I don't know, to get to read your book type of thing, or these are the people that are most resistant. And so in my experience, that hasn't been it. So that's been really cool.
Really funny. I've heard that older women read the most out of anybody. um so there's because I'm a writer and I read all the time. There's been this discussion over the past few years among writers and people who work in publishing about diversity in publishing, and how publishing is so white, and it's mostly white women making these choices about what essentially gets published by traditional publishers. And I wondered, there's been some efforts to change that. In some ways it feels like things haven't changed that much, and I kind of wondered what your opinion was on that, and do you feel like it's getting any easier or not, or
Yeah.
I don't know, I just kind of wonder, what do you think the climate is on those issues?
I think that the climate is very open to it. I think that there was like a tweet that somebody put out a couple months ago, maybe more than a couple months ago, and she broke down the statistics of the demographics of people publishing right now from the big five, and that's like Random House, Penguin, those big publishers, big box. And I think that it showed that like less than 1% were Native American authors. And being in the community, it feels like a lot of books are coming out all the time from other Indigenous authors. So I'd like to think that it is changing, but I think that there are still some narratives that people aren't ready, or that traditional publishing doesn't know what to do with. I have a friend who wrote a fiction manuscript, but it had to be published as poetry because like the publisher's understanding of form and hers was different. And just Indigenous storytelling could sometimes be different. More fragmented or more experimental. So I'd like to think it's changing, and I'm hoping that people will see that there is an audience for our work, and will continue publishing us. That'd be cool.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of exciting stuff coming out. And I guess I wanted to know too, what people like us who love to read, I think all of us we're big readers, and we all care about diversity. We're all in this DEI group. What can people like us do to, I think, further, these efforts, or to support writers like you? I know I have my ideas of what people like us can do. I just wonder from your perspective, what you think we could be doing.
I think doing things like this, like it's really cool to be brought in by a group to share work. Like I think that a lot of writers really appreciate that. It gives them more experience talking to groups and whatnot. I think other things that can be done is just attending our events. Like if you do see like a Indigenous writer coming to a local library, being there. A lot of times like we're worried, like, is anybody going to show up? So it's nice to have an audience. There's two groups one group in specific that I think would be great to, if you had the financial ability to donate, is to the Indian Girls Book Club. And it's run by I think she's 23, Yale graduate. who started a book nonprofit, and she gets all of these native authored books from multiple bookstores and delivers them to Indigenous people. She just did a big trip through the Navajo Nation and did, I think, more than 5 stops and dropped off my book along with other Indigenous authored books. So it's really cool. And right now, I think she has a GoFundMe for some Navajo and other Indigenous authors to go to a workshop at Tin House. So she's always doing things, and I can share that link in the chat. I'll do that.
That's really terrific. That's exciting. I'm gonna go back to a question that somebody posed about this is from Sandy about she just wanted to ask if you wanted to say anything more about trauma and healing as a feature in your writing.
Yeah. I think this is a question I get asked every time, and I'm always like, I don't know how to answer it. But for me, a lot of this book was grief narratives and trying to understand some things that had happened in my life and in lives of others. It's mostly fiction, but I like to tell people the parts that feel true, they probably are. Because I'm not that good of a writer where I can straight up just like lie about something, but the things that feel like they're really real and they have that emotional energy about them. The book was kind of a meditation on a lot of those things, and through writing the book, I was able to heal in different ways. During the process of it, though, particularly revisions, was really difficult because you have to delve back into really heavy things. And so what I did is practice wise and just like traditionally in my own Navajo ways, I would say like a prayer before I started writing, especially if it was going to be like really heavy emotional stuff. And then I would write, and I would usually wear like a necklace or a bracelet or something heavy so that I could feel grounded and be able to anchor myself in, I guess, the physical world and not the creative mental world of writing, to remind myself that I'm a being here, and it's important for me to be present. So yeah, writing the book was very healing, but also I was very aware of taking care of my mental health while writing it. I think that's really important, and those things don't come easily.
Okay, thank you. We have a question about your story, The Snow Bath, and what's the one about Alexa, and how did you get the inspiration for that one?
I got inspiration from it because I gifted my mom an Amazon Alexa, and she put it in her house. And one day she called me and she was like, Alexa told me that she can learn my language, because she was speaking in Navajo to my aunt on the phone. And I think Alexa said something like, hello, like I can learn key phrases in your language, or something like that. And I just thought it was so funny. And I imagined my mom being an Amazon Alexa. And she doesn't have perfect English. She kind of has an accent. So just imagining this like really sterile like machine just sounding like a Navajo woman, and I thought it was really entertaining. And that story came out of that. How would that situation come about?
Really funny. Okay. So Victor has a question about, is it harder for you to write for like specifically for Native American readers than for non-Native? And he's alluding to Toni Morrison, who said it was harder for her to write for African American readers.
I think at the beginning of my MFA program in the Institute of American Indian Arts, it was harder for me because I had done a lot of my formal education in Northern Utah. And so I was writing for predominantly white instructors and classmates. And there was a lot of things that were difficult for me to describe. Like I remember in one workshop, a boy criticized the name of my character. Her name was like Keisha or something like that. And he was like, shouldn't she have like a more Native American name? And I remember being like, it was the type of workshop where like the author's not supposed to speak. I said like, my name's Stacy. Like what do you, what does this mean? I'm not really sure. So I think that my community at IA, they encouraged me to I guess like push boundaries and not worry about it sounding, I don't know, like taking away the horns of it. Like I I didn't try to sterilize it for other readers. And I would say that my native writers, not native writers, native readers, when they've approached me and talked to me about the book, they've told me that they love it. They love the descriptions, and they have a lot of fond memories that are also like that they experienced growing up too. So my community has been really great and encouraging to me. And I'm sure that I'll meet some folks who aren't happy with it, but I think that that's their problem.
Yeah, good answer. Okay. Okay. Just making sure. I don't know if I might have missed something that, so I was gonna say keep them coming if you have more questions, but one we had and one I was gonna ask was what are you working on now, and what can we expect from you in the future?
Yeah. That's a great question. I am working on a novel right now. I don't have very many pages of it. I think I have like 50 and I've had 50 for like a year because I'm at a spot that's hard. It's hard to write. But it is about a Indian boarding school not too far from where I live, called the Intermountain Indian School. It's in Brigham City, probably like 30 minutes south of where I live. And the environment was really interesting. Like there was a lot of really cool artists that came through there, who taught pottery and visual art. There was also a lot of really good writing that was done in the schools, but because it was a vocational school, a lot of those students were encouraged to do like a trade, like cosmetology or auto stuff. But I had an interesting dream about a woman in a church chapel with children's teeth in a cookie tin and a line of little native kids like waiting to sell their teeth to her. And so it's kind of a tooth fairy story, but in the way that the school's probably haunted. And the tooth fairy is not a good person. And these kids trade teeth amongst themselves. It's weird, but it's really exciting, and I think it's going into a little bit darker, more thriller horror themes for me. And I don't know about that because I'm a very I'm a chicken writer. Things scare me very easily.
That's interesting that you're talking about horror. A while ago, I don't remember where I read this, but I remember reading something by a native writer who said they were talking about how there was this big rise in like fiction about the apocalypse recently, like in past years, and younger kids being so interested in that, but their response was saying, like, for Native Americans, we've
The
already been,
apocalypse already happened.
yes,
Yeah.
so we've already lived it, and all of our stories address that. I wondered if is that what you mean by the horror genre,
Yeah,
or like,
I'm just thinking kind of um like gothic novel, or like the sense that buildings or places can be haunted. And the idea of I guess the school, most particularly being the setting, is like these native kids went there and like to be assimilated. And even though the school might have been like a great experience for them, um, it still took something from them. And in that way, Indian schools were really lucrative at the time. A lot of our Ivy schools popped up out of those Indian schools, and getting money from the government to open them up to be Indian schools first. And so this idea of taking in native kids and turning out like civilized individuals, it has been really kind of difficult to grapple with, and in a way it is kind of to me like that's horrible. I think that's why it's going into that genre.
okay. One question I wanted to ask, I guess we're nearing the end a little bit. What are you reading right now? Do you have any, or is there anything you're anticipating coming out soon? Any great books you've heard about? Or anything you'd recommend to us, I guess, besides the ones you mentioned earlier of your old favorites?
I just read Women of Light by Kali Fajardo Anstein. And it's about like it's a multi-generational story about indigenous Mexican women living in the West. And I loved it. She's an amazing writer. What else have I read? I recently read a book by, oh, I just finished reading Mexican Gothic. I've been reading a lot of Latinx literature. Sometimes I can't read Native Lit because it makes me really sad. So I'm like, I'll read some Latinx Lit. Mexican Gothic, it's about essentially a haunted house and eugenics and mushrooms. It's really creepy. A lot of cool vibes. What else have I read? I like spaced all the books that I've read recently. Those are the main two I can think of.
Okay. Well, I just want to throw it out if there's anything else anybody wants to ask or I've missed. I know I may have missed some stuff in the chat. If anybody, feel free to unmute if you want. You don't have to type it in. Sure, Debbie.
Well, I appreciated learning some new words or some definitions that I was ignorant of. For example, squash blossoms being the necklace. I mean, it's very common, but I never knew it had a name. I'd seen it when I looked it up. And so I just appreciate learning all of these things that don't occur in my everyday life.
Thank you. Let's see, Debbie, you had your hand up.
Oh, thank you. Stacy, I want to first tell you how grateful I feel for you being here, because as I read your book, each story seemed like it was written by a different author. And to see you in person tonight, I can see all of those different authors in who you are, and the way you've been so kind in answering the questions and speaking to us. I just want to ask you, was that intentional to write each one as if somebody different was the author?
Yeah, it definitely was intentional, but maybe not, maybe not. I think that when I write stories, oftentimes it is an image or it is a concept that I want to tackle, but sometimes it's like a voice that like just starts talking. That sounds really weird and creepy, but you know, it's normal writer stuff. And I'll get a sense of who this character is and what their story is. And for some of them, like the casket in the back seat, Leo's voice came so easily to me, and I felt like I knew him. I think that the most challenging person to write in the book, though, was probably Under the Porchway, the protagonist in that. He's a young boy. He was a little bit more difficult to write. But yeah, usually I'm trying to write with a different voice, so it's good to hear that I accomplished that.
It's incredible. Thank you for your answer.
Karen?
So, Stacey, I wanted to know, how do you decide? Are you the one that decides what order to put the stories in? Because I mean, that's kind of fun to do that. And did you decide which one would be the story that you would give the title to the book to? Or I'm glad to know that you have all those opportunities, because I loved your book. I love it. And I want to hear some sequels to some of those stories. I'm hoping later we'll find out what happened to these people later. What did they end up doing? So I'm hoping you might do that sometime too.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll write any sequels for these. I think that a lot of them are standalones. As for the organization of the stories, my publisher kind of decided which stories would go in what order, and I think maybe I advocated for The Sheep is a Body of Knowledge, like last minute. It wasn't in the initial manuscript in the galley, but I kind of like really begged, like, please put this in, and they were able to squeeze it in. But they kind of decided that. And then for the title, I went through a lot of titles. I had originally thought of the title Indigenous Odysseys because it's a lot of Native people traveling back and forth from home or returning home or staying at home. And as I thought about it a little bit more, it just didn't feel like that title fit exactly, because it was technically the title of my thesis project. But my thesis project wasn't in the book, so I just didn't feel like the title made sense with it anymore. So I came to different stories. I was thinking of calling it of Salt and Iron, Born for Salt and Iron. What other titles did I like? Something about the Glittering World. I think those are the main ones that I worked through. And then eventually my publisher was like, you need to choose a title. Like you can't keep doing this. You got to choose something. And so I went with The Missing Morning Star and Other Stories because I felt like that was the story out of the whole collection that I felt the most proud of. And yeah, and then that just became its name. And I'm glad I chose that one and not any of the others. It would have felt like a different book.
Good. Thank you very much.
Before we finish, Stacy, can you say your last name for us?
Yeah, it's Dinette Sosi.
Dinette Sosi. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, is that it? Does anybody have anything else? I guess with one more thing, we do have a few minutes. I wanted to ask, have you thought about doing a graphic novel or any other genres? Like I was just thinking about how your stories would be so great, like as a movie or thinking of TV shows, like I've been a huge fan of Reservation Dogs. I don't know if you all have seen that. Just picturing like the Navajo version of that with all these young, teenagers and young adults, and if you thought about screenplays or anything.
Yeah, I think it'd be really cool to see some of them as screenplays. Sterling Harjo, who's one of the writers, I think he's the main writer of Reservation Dogs. He graduated from my program, so that's really cool. I think it's sometimes it's so cool to think of the people that came from this program that I also came from. I'm like, wow, that must mean something. As for other like genres, I think that I would like to do maybe a graphic novel one day because I do like drawing and art. I just haven't practiced that as much anymore. Like I'm mainly when I have free time, I'm focusing on writing my novel, but yeah, sometimes I do poetry. Eventually it'd be really cool to still see my books or my stories on film, but I might have to collaborate with one of my classmates to write the screenplay for that so it can happen.
Well, that's great. I think you have so many things that you could be doing, and you have a fan club now. So
Great.
I guess that's it for me. I don't have any other questions, but
We
just
thank
wanna
you,
thank you.
Stacy,
Thank you.
for spending time with us. This certainly was a delightful evening and a real treat for us. And it was fun. It was fun to hear from you in such a delightful way. And we encourage you to keep on keeping on and let us know what you're doing. We'd really like to hear more from you. So include us in your fan club and your loop and whatever mail you're doing. So we appreciate that.
Yeah, good idea.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate you guys having me. It's been so cool and it's been good to see y'all on Zoom again. Those people that were with me at the table, my buddies, that night, that was really good. I was really nervous. So it's great to make friends in other places.
So,
Wonderful.
Thank you.
well, have a good evening.
Thank you, Stacy.
everyone.
Thank you
Keep
so much.
writing.
You.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bravo.
Bye.
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 Hi.
Bye.